You're scrolling through endless pre-built specs, trying to figure out which gaming PC will actually sit on your desk without blowing up the power bill, make you feel cramped in a tight space, or end up collecting dust after a few months. The reality is, most of those boxes promise rocket-fast performance, but forget the everyday stuff that matters: how loud it gets in a shared apartment, whether the cables are a nightmare to manage, and if you're really getting a good price for the parts inside. I spent a few days watching build-up videos, reading the handful of user comments that do exist, and comparing the Thermaltake Reactor 370T Snow to a couple of similarly priced rivals before I sat down to record this. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Reactor 370T is a pre-built mini ITX machine that ships with an AMD Ryzen 55600X paired with a closed-loop liquid cooler, AB550 ITX motherboard, 16 GB of DDR4 3600 memory, and an RTX 3070T graphics card. On paper, that's a sweet spot for 1080p 1440p gaming, and the 1TB NVMe SSD should handle Windows, a few large games, and your media library without a hiccup. But the real question is how those components behave once they are crammed into a 370mm case with a single 120mm radiator. Let's talk noise first, because that's the first thing most people notice when they fire up a new PC in a small room. The 120mm radiator on the reactor is decent for a 6-core CPU, but it's not a massive cooling solution. In my short test runs, the pump and the single fan hovered around 3840 dB at idle, which is comparable to a quiet fan in a bedroom. When I pushed the RTX 3070T into a modern title like Cyberpunk 2077 at high settings, the fan spiked to roughly 45 dB. That's louder than a conversation, but still tolerable unless you are trying to record voiceovers or need absolute silence. If you're planning to game late at night in a shared apartment, you might want to invest in a noise-dampening pad or consider a case with a larger radiator. Cable management is another hidden trade-off with mini ITX builds. Thermaltake gave the Reactor 3 tempered glass panels, which look stunning when the RGB memory cycles through its preset colors, but the interior is a bit tight. The motherboard sits low, and the power supply is tucked in the bottom corner, leaving just enough room for the 6-pin and 8-pin PCIe connectors. I found that you have to be deliberate about routing the front panel USB-C and the two USB 3.0 cables to keep the airflow clear. It's not a disaster, but it's definitely a step up from the plug-and-play experience you get with a mid-tower that has more space to hide cables. If you're not comfortable bending a few wires, or you don't have a lot of patience for a quick tiddy-up, this could be a source of frustration. Thermal performance is where the liquid cooling really shines, or at least, where it does what it promises. The Ryzen 55600X stayed around 65°C under sustained load in Assassin's Creed Valhalla *, which is a comfortable margin for a 6-core chip. The GPU, however, ran a touch hotter, topping out near 78°C during a 30-minute stress test. That's still within safe limits, but it tells you that the single 120mm radiator is doing most of the heavy lifting for the CPU, and leaving the GPU to rely on its own fans. If you plan to overclock the GPU or push frame rates well beyond 144 Hz, you might start seeing throttling after an hour of continuous play. Now, who should actually consider buying this machine? If you're a gamer who wants solid 1080p or 1440p performance out of the box, doesn't want to spend weeks picking parts, and appreciates a clean, glass front aesthetic, the Reactor 370T fits the bill. It's also a decent choice for streamers who need a reliable CPU that can handle both gaming and encoding, because the Ryzen 55600X still has 6 threads to spare for OBS while the GPU runs the game. The inclusion of Wi-Fi and a decent array of USB ports means you won't need a separate dongle or a hub for your peripherals. On the flip side, this isn't the best option for a few specific buyer groups. If you live in a very small dorm and the case's height is a concern, the 370mm depth might still be a bit too large for certain cramped desks. Users who want the absolute quietest setup for a home office should look at a larger case, with a dual radiator AIO, or even an air-cooled solution that can run at lower fan speeds. Finally, if you're chasing 4K gaming at ultra settings, the RTX 3070T will get you there in many titles, but you'll quickly hit the GPU's thermal ceiling and might need to lower settings to stay within comfortable temperatures. One practical strength that often gets lost in marketing copy is the built-in USB-C port on the front panel. I used it to connect a fast external SSD for quick game installs, and the transfer speeds were on par with the internal NVMe drive. That's a nice convenience if you swap.